All right, here it is, guys. That's the electrical wiring harness to make your bike road legal. Tail lights, blinkers, brake lights, headlights. It's even got GPS nav in there. Everything you want. I know what you're asking. What the hell is this for? Is this a road bike? Does this go on my Sur-Ron? Does this go on my Coleman mini bike? Does this go on my electric motorcycle? Yeah, it goes on it all. It's gonna be the exact same. The one difference is here. Power comes in to this electrical harness. 12 volt positive and your equivalent 12 volt negative. It's how the power comes in here is all that's different. I'm doing this one for an e-bike, so I'll have some e-bike tips and tricks in here, but it doesn't matter. On an e-bike, this is how I'm going to put 12 volts into this harness. DC to DC converter. Whatever your battery is on your e-bike, let's say it's 72 volts, you're going to bring 72 volts in on this side, hook that to your big ass e-bike battery, and you're going to bring 12 volts out this side. That 12 volts goes into your harness. Now your harness has 12 volts. Easy. If you have a mini bike like a Coleman, you need to get 12 volts into this harness and your stator is so weak it'll barely run that little light it comes with. Get yourself a battery off eBay. Get one of these little batteries for a power wheel, like a kid's toy. 12 volt rechargeable battery. Get yourself a recharger. Thing will last forever. My Coleman mini bike, I charged it maybe once a year and ran all this stuff on it. Headlights, blinkers, horns, the whole gamut. And that's super easy. Your 2 wires go right to your battery. Can't be simpler than that. On your Coleman mini bike, your Predator 212 type stuff, your coil is kind of like your CDI and trigger all in one. So we don't have to worry about any of that. But if you're wiring up a GY6, you're going to have this kind of coil, AC fired. If you have a GET motor like a Honda Ruckus, you're going to be DC fired. There's not a lot of difference. These are AC or DC fired stator bikes. You're going to need one of these. That's your converter. This will convert AC power that comes out of your stator into DC power. You can find these things with plugs on them. The plug looks something like that. Stators give you AC power. You're going to have a stator that charges your battery. And that'll be the difference in your gas bike. And this will be real simple. The stator will have a white wire and a green wire. That green wire is ground, but your stator is actually grounded to where it mounts. These control the field in your stator. You're going to have a red wire, and you're going to have 1 to 3 yellow wires. If that yellow wire does not go into this box, don't use it. Get rid of it. That might go to headlights, tail lights, things like that. You don't want to use AC power for any lighting. That's a junk idea. That's what the Chinese do, so these bikes can have a dead battery and still have lights. But you take like that Vespa there, that motor will be DC fired, these motors will be AC fired. The stator puts out AC. This will convert it to DC. So it's a rectifier. It's also a regulator. It's going to charge your battery no more than like 13.5 volts. So it's going to maintain your battery for you and convert it to DC. That's all this does. It charges your battery. So the only difference in this and the simple Coleman design is we're charging our battery while we're driving. We don't have to charge it later. The yellow wire and the green wire and the white wire will all go to this. Yellow, green, and white. That yellow wire is bringing in your AC that's going to be converted into DC. This red wire is the DC going out. That's all you need to know about this plug, is that red wire brings DC out and to the battery. That's going to keep your battery charging, run your 12 volt system. This red wire here out of the stator does something different. On an AC system, it goes to a CDI and it fills a CDI with power. On a DC fired system like this, the battery is going to fill the CDI with power instead of the stator filling it with power. Other than that, both systems are pretty much the same. You're going to see a blue wire coming out of your stator, but it really doesn't come out of the stator. It could be a yellow wire with a blue stripe. It could be a blue wire. It could be a blue wire with a white stripe. It's going to have blue on it. This is a pulse pickup. It's going to mount on the engine case. It's going to also go to the CDI, and that's an AC CDI or a DC CDI. Doesn't matter which one. Is on the flywheel surrounding the stator with the magnets in it. There'll be a bump in it, and it detects that bump and tells the CDI to release the spark into the spark plug. None of this matters for our harness. All you need to know is that that red wire coming out of this charges your battery. So you may have to make that connection yourself to make your battery charge and to keep your 12 volt system alive. Your harness wire is hooked to your battery, just like the Coleman. Unlike the Coleman, we're going to use that stator to keep this battery charged instead of a plug-in charger, and that's it. These two wires don't actually go to the battery. You're going to want to have a key switch. These two wires would go to the key switch. You don't need to run the negative through the key switch. It really doesn't have to happen. You can, and that's fine, but there's no point in it. That negative can go to the ground, and that ground may be your frame on a gas bike, or it may be just a central location on an e-bike. That positive will go through the key switch. 12 volts will go into the key switch from your battery on a gas bike. On an e-bike, you're not going to have this battery. You're going to have a big ass battery, like 72 volts. So that 72 volt battery, so that's it. Then the converter goes to the battery. That goes to the key switch. The key turns it on and sends power into your main harness. All right, for all you haters out there, I do have a soldering gun, and I do solder. Here is the main 12 volt negative, and that will go to the front because we have to have negatives for blinkers and stuff like that. All the positive stuff usually goes through switches. So we're starting to develop a central location point for all the 12 volt positives and all the 12 volt negatives. This will become your fuse box. All my consumers go into this fuse box. Here's one going to maybe the relay. Here's one going to the horn. Here's one going to just the main 12 volt source that goes back to the front. Got one going to headlight. Of course, my AliExpress special didn't come with any fuses. Typical. And I have no frickin' idea what size you are. There's about 1,500 different blade fuse sizes, ranging from microscopic to normal size. I don't know if these are normal size or not. I'll probably have to go get some now at AutoZone. Since this is an e-bike, the grounds all go to a central location right here. It's like a little ground bus bar. I've got a ground going to the main harness. It goes to the rear of the bike and the front of the bike. Ground's going to all the accessories, headlights, relays, things like that. So I'm actually doing this a little bit different. I'm actually bringing my power from my big ass battery in off these wires, unlike I told you. This is just a particular thing, the way I'm doing it. So if you see it hooked up weird, this is why. I'm gonna run the power in here at 96 volts. I'm gonna run that power into my key switch right here. Then my key switch is gonna send the power back in. Then that power is gonna come out here on these two wires. So I've basically got 96 volts coming from the key right here. I'm gonna go 96 volts into my converter, 12 volts out to this system on these two wires right here. In the end, you need, going to the rear of the bike, a positive and negative, a right and left blinker, and a brake light. In the front, you're gonna need a negative, a high beam, and a low beam, a left and right blinker, and a horn. And notice when I make my harness, no black tape, just zip ties. Zip tied everywhere. You're gonna go back into this thing 1,000 times. Like right now I'm putting in the water pump. So yeah, just zip tie it. Even after you run it for the first month or so, you're gonna find mistakes, you're gonna find problems, you're gonna wanna add stuff. So don't tape up the harness till way later in life. There's a huge variety of key switches, ignition switches on eBay, AliExpress, Amazon. I actually got the one that goes to this Suzuki Bandit so I could mount it in that hole right there in these two bolts. I could have just ordered something much cheaper. A good option is always like a GY6 ignition switch. How I'm doing my key switch is I'm gonna have plus and a negative coming off the posts on the controller. 96 volts in my case, and it's going to here and to here. From there I've got this red wire. I want that pretty thick. That's going to be carrying my whole 12 volt load, even though it's 96. This one here is the negative wire. It's going to be carrying my whole 12 volt load, even though it's 96. Positive and negative coming off these going into, you don't run that positive into the 96 volt to 12 volt DC converter. Just a little box with the fins on it there. It takes that 96 volts in, black and red, and it spits out yellow and black 12 volts. But we don't want to do that yet, because we actually need 96 volts for more of this system. We're going to take 96 volts and put it into this key switch. When I bring 96 volts into the key switch and turn it on, it's going to spit 96 volts back out. The question I get a lot is, well, can this switch handle 96 volts? Yeah, a little teeny wire. This little teeny stupid wire here can handle 96 volts. It cares about the amps going through it. Watts divided by volts. Take that 55 watt headlight. 55 watts divided by 96 volts is a half an amp. If we ran 12 volts through that same wire, 55 watts divided by 12, that's 4.5 amps. So no, 96 volts won't hurt it. Now it'll be rated, it'll say, just because the people that are selling this stuff, they're just salesmen. They're gonna put 12 volts on there and you're gonna think, oh, it's a 12 volt only key switch, or it's a 12 volt only switch. No, it's good for any voltage, just a wire. Once that 96 volts comes out, it's gonna go to this converter and convert all this stuff to 12 volts. But the reason I wanted 96 volts coming out of my key switch is because I also need the 96 volts to go to a wire back to the controller. There's a wire that goes back to the harness here that turns this controller on, and I want it to come on when the key switch comes on. I also need a 96 volt wire going to my display so it can tell me how many volts I'm putting out, because it's going to read this battery. So I need 3 different paths for that 96 volt electricity: the display, the controller, and my converter. The 96 volt wire going to the display is tiny, not a lot of amps. The 96 volt wire going to the controller is tiny. Then you can use your thick one to go into the converter, and then the converter will convert that to 12 volts. Then you can feed this entire 12 volt system. Now how I did mine is when you turn the key on, you're allowing that red 96 volt wire to turn on this gray wire and send it back into the bike. But I took that gray wire and spliced in a blue wire and yellow wire, so all three of these plugs, blue, yellow, and gray, become 96 volts whenever I turn the key on. And the white one will feed the entire 12 volt system. Because the white wire, so that's the 96 volts, it'll go into the converter, red, and then it'll bring it back out 12 volts on the yellows. On a gas-powered bike, you're going to run your key to the battery. Now you can run your grounds to the frame, or you can run them through the switch, doesn't really matter, but we'll just run the hot through the switch. So I would run my key switch to the battery, and turning my key on will connect the battery to the harness. Easy. Now I've got all my positives going to this junction box, and that'll have the fuses in it. Got my AliExpress taillight. This should have been from Temu. Look how tiny it is. They said they were aluminum, but they sure look plastic to me. AliExpress. So I run all the grounds from the blinkers, tail light, brake light, one ground. Then I run these little running lights and the tail light into the same hot. And I also come off with a plus and a negative, 12 volt, just in case I want to add accessories later. That'll be a nice quick disconnect. If I take this thing off, I can disconnect it. So we've got the handlebar brake switch hooked up here. And this is just one wire going in, the same wire coming out. That's just a switch that breaks the wire or connects the wire. And they come down to here. I use one of these 2-position connectors. I'll use the red one to go to the main power source. That's a 12 volt. It goes up into the switch. Then when the brake's activated, it comes back out to this black wire. That goes into my pink wire. I'm gonna use my pink wire to go back to the brake light. But on the way there, it's gotta do this same thing again. I've gotta tap in at 2 points, one for taking electricity to the rear brake switch, and one for sending the rear brake signal back out to the rear brake. For the foot brake, 2 little prongs that connect the wire, 12 volt positive going in. So this wire will be shared between that switch and the handlebar switch. When you look at these switches on eBay and AliExpress, they'll come with a little wiring diagram. The problem is the colors they show the switch having, the colors on the wiring diagram, completely different. And when you get the switch, the colors are even different again. So you don't know what goes to what. And because you don't know, because the instructions are never right, you need one of these. This is a multimeter. Go to Harbor Freight and get one and make sure it has continuity check. That's probably one of the things I use the most. And it's very simple. If you touch the 2 wires, it beeps. I can touch 2 of the leads coming out of this switch, and then when I turn the switch on, if I get that beep, I know those 2 wires go together. Same thing, I can figure out which one's hot and which one's left and right by just running continuity tests. And you'll need that for the ignition switch too. 12 volt wire coming out to the blinkers going into the switch. That's to bring the positive in. Now the blinkers will be grounded by a whole separate grounding wire. Could be a wire going to your frame on a gas bike, or just a wire going to the main ground harness on the e-bike. So we're not going to run any grounds through here. That ground wire coming out to the front, it splits into 2 here, and it's a ground for the horn. And it continues on down, it splits into again, and it's a ground for the left and right blinkers. The ground will just come from the bus bar. The ground's going to always be hooked up all the time. The switch only controls positive, 12 volt DC coming in. And then it'll have 2 wires coming out. This is just a switch now. I'm going to put the positive to the right, or I'm going to put the positive to the left, or I'm going to have the positive in the middle, and it's off. It's no different than this switch here. High beam and off is just like left, right, and off. So that's all that does. And I'm using this orange and blue wire here for my left and right blinkers. They're tied in to the same wires that can control the rear blinker, your left and right. Some blinkers come with flasher relays installed in them. You never quite know what you're going to get from AliExpress or eBay or Amazon. They don't even say it when they have it, or sometimes like the ones I just got say they have it, but they didn't have it. When I turn my blinkers on, they just stay on constant, and that's normal. If you want them to flash, and you try to put the flashers on these wires, you would need 4 flashers. The best way is to just get 1 flasher. You would cut this wire, put the flasher in here, so then this 12 volts being fed to the flasher at all times. When you ask for that power by hitting left or right, and it'll send a pulsed signal to the left or right and make your blinkers blink. When I select this orange or blue wire with that switch,
It's going to run 12 volts through it, and it's going to split into 3 different places. It's going to go to the front blinkers. It's going to go to the display. And you might have a display on your gas bike too. You know, think of your bikes that have a speedo up there with the little arrows that flash whenever your blinker's on or your headlight's on. So the display is not just for an e-bike. So you have to have the orange and blue lead going up there for left and right blinkers. And then also it's got to go to the rear to plug into your tail lights and your rear blinkers. Now the blinkers will just have a wire for blinking and a wire for ground. That's it. But they might have more lights, like this little side light. So they'll have a third wire for maybe a running light or a halo light. That third wire just goes into your power wire. The same wire that's going to come down and run your running light, the light that's always on in the back, your tail light. So those 3 can be put together.
It's going to have 4 more wires. Remember, these are just switches. A wire's going to go into this switch and a wire's going to come out of this switch. Same wire. I hooked this to my display. You can see here's the hot wire coming off the bus bar. That's 12 volt going into that switch, the red one. And when I activate the switch by pressing it, it sends the 12 volts out another wire. And then I put that 12 volt wire into this. This is the power wire for the backup camera and nav display. So the horn is the same way. A wire goes into it and a wire comes out of it. This yellow wire here coming out of the bus bar, that's the horn wire. Goes up into the switch. Hit that, that's a momentary one. See, this one here stayed on. When I press that, it connects the 2 wires. You send the positive out to the red wire here, and when the plus is activated, it sets the speaker off. Nothing fancy on the horn, just the smallest one I can find on eBay. It's only 1.5 amps, so it can go through the little wires that's in the switches up here on the horn switch. Horn's super easy and makes it road legal. Now the headlight switch is going to be a little confusing. You've got a 3-wire switch, high, low, and power going in. Then you have this 3-wire connector. All 3 wires do not get hooked up. So this wire right here goes out to my headlights. They're going to be way out here in front somewhere. This will hook to my switch right here. So I'm making the connection to put this on the switch. But how the headlights work is power is going to go into this switch right here. Power is going to go to the headlight via these other 2 wires, high beam and low beam. You can see I got high beam blue, low beam white. That black one's a ground. So when this gets plugged in, this black wire will go to a ground. It won't be wired to this harness for the headlight switch. These 2 wires will go to high beam and low beam, but this positive wire that feeds power into the switch will come from somewhere else, and this negative wire will get negative from somewhere else. So then you end up with another plug for positive and negative into the system for your headlight. And this plug takes the ground into the ground, which is all it's doing there. And then it takes the positive into the switch. If you actually want a real headlight up front, there's going to be more to your headlight wiring. 8, 9, 10 amps. That's a lot of amperage for these little wires. I want to use something called a relay. I have a whole video on just headlights. I'll put that at the end of this video. And that's where I put the relay on here and everything. I'll skip that to try to keep this video shorter. This goes out to the headlight harness. We've got to add a wire. You're going to tap into the blue and blue on your display, and it will tell you that your headlight's on. But I just use it on the high beam only, so I can know when my high beams are on. So right now my headlight's obviously on, but when I hit the high beams, I get the little blue indicator there. The same thing for your blinkers. We're going to have a tap on each of those blinkers so you get the flashing blinker. I got this projector light from AliExpress. I liked it because it had this H3 bulb, which is a standard for automotive use, so I can buy one of those anywhere. 55 watt, 12 volt DOT. I figure if it's not bright enough, I can always buy me one of those xenon off-road only illegal super bright ass things. It's kind of cool because if you look down in there, there's like a fake light inside there also. Maybe that's a daytime running light or whatever. It just makes it look like your headlights are on, even though it doesn't do much. But it doesn't take any power. So I'm going to use that for my regular wire going to the switch. Then I'll run the blue wire for the high beams through a relay because this takes quite a bit of power. You'll see this headlight only has 3 wires. Green is ground, brown is low beam, blue is high beam. On the low beam, the light positive, just going through this switch with the thin wires. You have to watch my video on how to wire a headlight. So here's where it's going to get crazy. I've got the ground coming in from the relay and the hot coming in from the relay. That's going to run that 55 watt light. Remember, the ground has to carry a high load also. So when it's in high beam mode, the ground will be
pulled through the relay. When it's in low beam mode, it'll just be pulled through this wire. I'm gonna combine those two grounds. The high beam and low beam will be separate, of course. They'll go to their individual wire, but the grounds can be combined. But even though you're combining them, you still have to run that ground through the relay because this is an electric bike. The frame is not a ground. We can't be grounding things to the frame, but I am using a ground from the harness that is not a big ground, and it's going to this headlight negative, low load ground. But as long as I combine it with that ground from the relay, that's fine. They can share the same ground. I just need a really fat wire like this one to ground that headlight going into that relay. It's not going to go to a battery because we're not going to have a battery. It's going to be one of these thick wires here going to my ground bus bar. You see that big thick one? That's probably the one coming from the relay. You're just trying to prevent this wire from getting hot and melting everything. So here you can see I've got the thick ground here and a thinner ground going into the same and coming out with a thick ground. I know it seems dumb, but this little wire here, the black one, is not enough copper to carry the load on that headlight. So you have to add in this thick one that goes back to the bus bar and is turned on with the relay. And there's the headlight harness connected. Use the stupid bullet connectors. So low beam is that little kind of light in there, and then high beam is the bright one. Cool. The converter, I think, has to be at least 24 volts to work or more. I can't really test it out. But you can test the 12 volt parts. Here's the relay switch turning the headlights on. I get the high beams left blinker, the right blinker. Troubleshooting my Android Auto. But it's good to test as you go. You'll find stuff doesn't work, like my display, and you can troubleshoot it while the wires are all open and accessible. I just had a bad connection there I made. Some of these wires are so fragile and thin, if you solder them, they break and they get real brittle. So I have to use butt connectors on these really thin ones. Now I've got continuity. We'll turn that on. So I've got the Android Auto hooked up, little button right here. Now I guess it's touchscreen. Need the Bluetooth to it. Oh, here's the cameras. There's my rear view camera. That's pretty cool. That's all I really wanted, honestly. Rear view mirrors are all but useless on these bikes. Little camera fit right there pretty good. Way more picture than the rear view mirror would give you. So it takes a lot of extra work, but make these switches where the wiring can be separated. On this handlebar, I've got the turn signal switch, got the hot going in, the horn for the green button. I've got the red button, the left and right signals going through those little wires there. That's a completely separate system. Headlight switch, the headlight power going in and out. And remember, this power is not carrying the load for that big headlight. It's just carrying the load to go to the relay. And then I've got the headlight wires, ground, high beam, and low beam. And these wires are only carrying the load for that little light. When it goes to the high beam, that blue wire triggers a relay to come on. And the relay takes positive and negative from the big source up here all the way to the headlight. On the right handlebar, I've got the throttle, standard 3-wire. I've got the 3-speed switch, 3-wire. A boost switch. And I've got a brake switch that activates the brake light. So that whole handlebar is separate. This whole wiring harness can be removed, or each individual component can be replaced and changed. And it's easy to do because I've got separate wiring for everything on the handlebars. Just like the factory guys. The idea is I want to be able to remove any component without cutting a wire. So I have disconnects everywhere, no matter what I take off. Also, I want to be able to take this wiring harness off the frame, remove it completely. I may want to paint the frame sometime. What a prophetic statement.